You are very welcome back to St. Eugene's Cathedral Hall here in the Diocese of Derry. We're continuing our journey through the great Gospels of the Lenten Sundays, and we're now at Palm Sunday, that beginning of Holy Week, the beginning of the central week of our liturgical year, where we celebrate all those key events of Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then the Easter Vigil and Easter Day. And with me to reflect on the Gospel, particularly the welcoming of Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, is Oran Gartland. Oran is a second-year mathematics student at the University of Oxford. And Oran is with us this afternoon. Oran, thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our conversation about the strange events from the life of Jesus that never cease to fascinate people. I think everyone can imagine what's happening in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday as Jesus arrives. Everyone can sort of picture from depictions in stained glass windows and books and Bibles and so on what's happening. What struck you about the Gospel of Palm Sunday, where Jesus arrives in Jerusalem and the crowd shout out, "Hosanna to the Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord"? Any particular parts of that resonated with you?
I think personally, it seems almost this Holy Week experience, almost like it's the start of Holy Week, it almost seems like a snapshot of almost the struggle of someone trying to be a devout Christian in the world. Because if you think we start on Palm Sunday, and as we move through Holy Week, we can see the same crowd which welcomes Jesus into Jerusalem initially is somehow twisted another way almost, and you see what happens. The shouts just turn to the complete opposite by Good Friday. And I think that it really struck me how you can almost see in the modern world how initially it's easy to welcome the Lord, but then whenever difficulties come, especially in our society today, then you can see that it's very easy to be drawn away.
Yes, I think that's very perceptive. And in many ways, what's happening on Palm Sunday, it seems to me, is the crowd, the population, the inverted commas, ordinary people are welcoming Jesus. And that clearly isn't going down well with the religious establishment. That's the last thing they want. I think, doesn't the Gospel challenge Jesus? They challenge Jesus about these people calling him Son of David and so on.
Yeah, I think that you should see the Pharisees saying that check your disciples, almost, what Jesus says, and it kind of is a very strong line that if these were to be silent, the very stones would cry out, and I thought that was very powerful.
Yes, it's a real challenge, which I suppose, as you say, has been part of all of Jesus' life. He's been challenging the establishment and their picture of God, because he's a different picture of God, the Father, the merciful and so on, that he wants to communicate. And clearly they want to be much more in control of how people view God. So there is that, not just a change from what people are saying on Palm Sunday to what they're saying on Good Friday. In many ways, the ordinary people bare their souls, bare their hearts for Jesus, and then the establishment tries to control it. And I suppose that happens everywhere. The dominant groups in society always want to control the narrative, and are always very happy to try and ensure that something that's unsuitable or uncomfortable for them is ruled out. So there's that abuse of power on their part.
Yeah, I think so. That's very much the case. There's definitely an abuse of power. I think it struck me as well. You know, you can see the Pharisees and what control they had over the people, but you can see in Palm Sunday the people were still attracted to Jesus. There just must have been something about him, and that kind of sticks with me, that there just must have been something about him, something different that just drew them away from this control, as you say, this power that the Pharisees had over them. Almost, I think the Lord says elsewhere in the Gospels that they lay heavy burdens and don't use a finger to lift them themselves.
And he arrives on a donkey. He doesn't come on a horse. I think that's symbolic as well.
Yeah, I think that's as Old Testament references to that too, isn't there, Isaiah?
Yes, so you're spot on there. So much of what Jesus did and said was building on language and experiences and prophecies that the Jewish people would have known well from their scriptures. They would have known, that was fulfilling the prophet Zechariah or Zephaniah, whoever it was the Old Testament prophet. They would have seen all those things as being powerful symbolic events that perhaps our eyes don't recognize nowadays because we're not as familiar with the Old Testament scriptures as they would have been. But I think you're right. It really is in some ways quite a cynical exploitation of people by the powerful to suit their game, so that there's a narrative goes out that they can justify. And in many ways, Good Friday may have been people being bullied by people going around saying, "Shout for Barabbas, shout for Barabbas." No, and people say, "Why shout for Barabbas?" I mean, we can see that crowds can very often be manipulated, and what is allegedly popular choice may very well be much more sort of forced on people rather than a voluntary one.
Yeah, the public can be misled, and you can see that in all walks of life, can't you, at the moment?
Yes, and Jesus certainly was challenging those who wanted to mislead public opinion. So yeah, okay. Can we move on a little bit further from that? Because you said it yourself, it's one thing to recognize Jesus in your life, have an experience or grow up with a strong sense of faith. But keeping that alive when the dominant ideology is saying something quite different can't be easy. How do you experience the faith journey in the context of a university far away from home?
Yes.
In Oxford? I mean, I imagine you need some sort of a community of faith if you're to journey there.
Certainly, there's definitely lots of temptations and things. Obviously, you could imagine going to university, encountering different cultures, different people who are basically saying everything other than what you might have been used to. But I think it's very important, and I personally have been very lucky. As I arrived at university, I've been part of a Catholic community. There's a Catholic chaplaincy there, and it's very, very profound in terms of, like, there's actually a really good, tangible Catholic presence, and I think that's very, very important. I think there's a line in the Our Father, lead us not into temptation, and I think having peers around you that aren't maybe inclined to say, oh, everyone's doing whatever you might want, whatever you think that someone wants you to do, but they're actually trying to live the gospel message as well. I think that's really counteracts that, and we have this great chaplaincy where people who are really interested in their faith.
Yes, I can imagine a place like Oxford is going to be a place not where there's a closed, narrow, blinkered Catholic mentality, as some might caricature it, but actually a lot of intelligent, competent young people who are prepared to ask awkward questions but want to journey deep into things rather than just living on the surface. I take it you come across people not just from a mathematical background like yourself, but from all sorts of disciplines in the university, all sorts of departments and faculties.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. So it is there. To me, one of the biggest, most important messages I think we can get to young people at the minute is that the faith has intellectual credibility. Faith is a rational choice in our modern world, and that's something that really brought my faith on over the years. And I think that these people that I encounter have really journeyed in their faith, as you say, and grew in their faith by asking these questions. I think that there's maybe this tendency in the modern world to say that science can explain everything, or to the extreme, and they might say the scientific method might be the only way we can obtain truth. But even that's more of an extreme view. But I think even just in the modern world, we kind of say that science is almost in contradiction to faith, and that's something that I think that young people might just be implicitly sort of think that now just because of the culture, whereas these people that I've encountered have asked the big questions, have actually found out that that's not the case. And truly, for example, over the years, that science almost has a presupposition that I can see as someone who studies science, that in order to discover scientific laws and things, you have to almost assume that the universe can be understood, and to do that then almost derives that there has to be an intelligent creator. And to me, that's the most coherent explanation rather than the one that maybe new atheists might put forward.
Yes, I don't think you're saying that there's enough information there to convince someone rationally, but certainly loads of material to suggest that Christian faith is reasonable.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
not irrational by any means. It obviously always involves a leap of faith.
Yeah,
as well.
It does, but I think that if you read things like St. Thomas Aquinas' 5 Ways and etc., that actually they're very compelling, and I think that if young people were to take that more seriously and maybe read more into it, they'll find that there is really a reasonable conviction of faith in this world. You can have it, and then allow the Lord to touch their hearts.
And obviously, there's the scientific approach, there's the logical approach. I mean, there's the Thomas Aquinas 5 reasons for believing in God. But I suppose there's also the experience others will have of beauty in music, or in psychology, or in art, or there's a whole range of other ways in which I think we can experience the transcendent, not just logically.
Yeah, I was actually listening to Bishop Robert Barron there last week, and he gave a really good example that the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the scientists can analyze that and analyze maybe like the colors and the pigments and how a color forms by light striking the roof and all, but they can't say one thing about why it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Or, and I think another example he gave was that they can analyze the buildings in a city, the people in the city, but they can't say anything. This is the scientific approach. Science is brilliant, but I mean, science itself is limited. It cannot say whether this city is being run in a just way or not.
Yes, and you can say, a fellow may say, I really fancy a girl, yeah. But it's not a question of adding so many points for the hair and so many points for something else. As I guess I've now got past 45, therefore I must be in love. There are so many things in life about, as you say, about beauty, about experiences, about awe, about amazement, about grief, about hope, all of those things that are not scientifically measurable. Yeah. There's it would be a terribly narrow vision of humanity if all we were just a series of electrical impulses working within our brain. And I suppose you're saying that many of the people that you're studying with or you come across in the Catholic chaplaincy or at university actually are able to open our eyes to the transcendent rather than anyway think we're closing ourselves down by believing in God.
And they can articulate that a lot better than me, so they can. But no, it's really is. I do believe that's the case, that these young people have almost, through their intelligence almost, because some of them are extremely intelligent, have found God.
Yeah. And I suppose you have debates and lectures and all of that, which is good, asking the awkward questions.
Yeah, I understand some of it, but whenever two students who are doing PhDs in theology start talking about theology, of course, some of it is a bit beyond my level, but it's very, very interesting and inspiring. People writing theses and things it's just really, really great.
So there's the intellectual dimension, there's the head dimension to keeping that faith journey alive, keeping that sense of Jesus as Lord, welcome to him in our midst, alive. But there's also there's the heart dimension to faith, and I take it prayer and liturgy and all of those things are part of what the chaplaincy offers as well.
Yes, I think that the heart is very much the next step, and that's where the Lord really touches us. I think the intellectual dimension, you might be able to have a reason and a conviction to give God a chance almost, but I believe that the heart is really where people are converted. And I think that when they come to our community, or certainly when I entered the community, you encounter this group of young people who are so kind and generous and enjoy praying together. And I think that whenever you encounter the Lord in that way, in those people, then I think you always say believing is belonging, or belonging is believing. Yeah. And I think that that's a massive part, because a lot of us are like me and do scientific subjects, but some people do other things and they're maybe not so interested in, for example, physics and metaphysics and all these things, but they still can encounter the Lord. And I don't think that there's like an intellectual barrier either. I feel like the people that we encounter are so kind, you know what I mean? I think that if we are presence of the Lord in the world, then that is actually going to touch more people again, rather than just through the intellectual dimension.
Yes, I mean, I think you're sort of also suggesting too that part of our scientific world wants to gaze further out into space and further back in time, to see back billions of light years, and yet on the other hand, there's a temptation to say it really limits us to the absence of any transcendent. We want to look out far, and yet no. Actually, we're stuck on the earth, and there's nothing very much to life other than pottering around in the ground looking through a telescope. So I imagine that whole fullness of the human person, the head understanding, so it's a reasonable decision, and the heart knowing that you're in love with the Lord, because that crowd in Jerusalem that Palm Sunday were crying from their hearts. It wasn't just saying, yes, we have examined the evidence, we have come to the logical conclusion that this is possibly the Messiah. There was an enthusiasm there. And obviously young people have a passion and can be involved in things with great determination. I presume you find that liturgy is well done in different places in Oxford.
Yeah, there's great youth involvement in liturgy. We would have, for example, what I encountered over there that I hadn't encountered here would be adult servers. Mm-hmm. And I participate in that, and I think that they do take it very seriously, you know what I mean, and the choir goes every week, and They really do. They just love to be able to express their faith in a really, really almost well practiced, but well refined, but at the same time welcoming. I think they have a great balance, because I think you can kind of, if everything's too perfect, then maybe the people feel a bit uncomfortable, maybe if you're only new. But I think there's a great balance between, for example, making sure that, like, they're very, very passionate about making sure that the Mass is done very, very well, but at the same time, if you enter the community, you don't feel like you have to be you don't have to know every prayer in the book, you know what I mean, to be welcomed. And I think that that's a great balance that we have struck. I hope we've struck, but obviously I'm only one person, but I feel like the community over there have struck that.
And it's a very international community, I imagine.
Yes.
Coming from countries, many of them, which have a different sense of church, where a church for Catholicism or Christianity might be a tiny minority of the population, perhaps in some Asian countries, or I presume there's a whole range of church experiences that you're encountering there that you wouldn't always get in Derry.
You encounter these different languages, and you can really see the international dimension, and it just shows you how big the church actually is in the world, and they're all worshipping the same Lord, maybe in different ways. I think St. Paul gives great examples, speaks very eloquently about how we're all different parts making up the same body, and I think you can see that in action almost over there, and it's wonderful.
And I suppose it seems a wholesome way of doing things, to the extent that Christianity is sometimes caricatured as being unreasonable, irrational, and an escape from the world. But actually, with a community, with intellectual insight, with times of prayer and silence, people of faith actually are encountering the reality of the world, and Holy Week's particularly strong, encountering the reality of a crowd that can be manipulated by powerful people, betrayal, belonging, loyalty, generosity, self-giving, all of those things. I mean, I think you're saying the head and the heart actually can enable us to engage with the deepest questions of human life.
Exactly. I think that, as you said, there's a caricature that maybe that it's, I don't know, unreasonable, but I think that whenever difficulties come, then having a faith rooted in Jesus actually allows the Christian person with true belief to encounter the difficult parts of the world, you know, like all the difficulties that maybe that we're told all to grow up. But I think that that's really the case, that the people who are saying grow up almost need to grow up, you know what I mean? That whenever we have a belief in the Lord, I think that allows you to face anything if it's strong enough.
Yes, and I mean, in many ways, somebody said Catholicism is the most bodily, the most earthy of religions, and it talks about a baby born in a stable, and it talks about someone being murdered on a cross, having been flayed, half dead, and a crown of thorns on his head, and the body of Christ in Holy Communion. We actually have a very real, corporeal, bodily faith, with a strong sense of the reality of sin in our bodies as well, and yet that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And I imagine you can sense that in a good, strong faith community and university.
Yes, exactly. There's great balance, you know, as you said there. I think that we can see from the Lord, even if we go back a week or two, that he almost, as you said, there's a reality of sin. If we go back to last week's gospel, the adulterous woman, the stoning of the adulterous woman, I think Jesus says two things at the very end of the gospel. He says to this woman who's been condemned for adultery and has been asked by Jesus to, the Pharisees, or the people who've brought her to him, who wanted to humiliate her, have asked Jesus, will we condemn her as Moses said? And Jesus says to her at the end, after he tells them, he who has not committed a sin should throw the first stone, he says to her at the end, neither do I condemn you, go and don't sin anymore. And I think that kind of sums up the balance that we ought to have, and that would be, neither do I condemn you. We don't put people down, we don't judge people, but neither do I sin, neither go away and don't sin anymore. We neither say that sin's okay, if you know what I mean. We need to get that balance.
And sin is real, it does exist.
Yes.
And we haven't got to look too far in the world to see a few examples of it. But I suppose you've looked at the head dimension of the faith journey. You've looked at the heart dimension and liturgy and worship and prayer and engaging with the scriptures. I suppose there has to be a hands dimension to your outreach, because there are so many people out there beyond your community who need to hear good news, who may feel isolated, who need forgiveness and mercy. Is that part of the chaplaincy's outreach as well?
Exactly. There's a very tangible presence of the companions of the Order of Malta, who we do a lot of work with the homeless, because there's a lot of homeless over there. That would be something that really
Some
struck
sleeping
me.
rough too out in the...
Sleeping rough. You know, there'd be one or two that would be out all night, and so we would bring, there was breakfast runs from the chaplaincy. But there's other hubs in Oxford as well who would do, you know, throughout the day there's certain things that we do, but quite often what you find is that these people just, all they want is a conversation. You know what I mean? They just want to be heard, they want to be listened to. Hello, what's your name? And it just, the same way as Jesus dealt with that adulterous woman, they just want to be seen and heard like that, just as people.
Rather than people walk past them and ignored them,
Yeah.
as if they weren't there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Obviously, the faith journey in university has been a significant part of your life. I mean, I feel a passion in there in you for faith in the modern world, and it's great to see a young person who's got a lot of intellectual abilities and a great passion for Jesus and a commitment to working with people as well. Do you enjoy the Holy Week ceremonies? Is that a strange question to ask?
That's great. Yes, I never. Of course, I'm home for them, which is even better. But yes, they're great. You know, just as the Holy Week goes on, you can just see how it develops. You know what I mean? You can see from Holy Thursday, you see the institution of the Eucharist. On Good Friday, then we celebrate the Passion. Then we have Sorrowful Day, Day of Penance. But then you can always see. It's almost, I suppose, it's nice for us rather than 2,000 years ago for the apostles. But you can always see the backdrop of Sunday coming, you know what I mean? All these difficult things, all the agony of Jesus and all, but you can see that the resurrection's coming. And I think that that's what our faith in the modern world does for us, if you know what I mean, is that despite the difficulties, despite the hardships, despite the temptations, if you go to university or you go wherever as a young person, or mental health, as we know, is a desperate thing at the moment, the backdrop of the resurrection makes everything make sense and makes everything okay.
Right. Yes, and even if we have the emptiness of Holy Saturday, then it is a long, empty day without, say, liturgy or Mass being celebrated. And that you're saying, I think, going through those and taking time to go through those actually is healthy rather than, come on, let's rush through this. It's experiencing with people who are hanging on their own crosses. It's experiencing emptiness and loss and lack of hope on some people's parts, and yet reassuring them that behind every hill of Calvary there lurks a tomb where life cannot be destroyed forever.
Yeah, the victory has been won.
Yes, yeah. But we go through the journey as if it had not been won, empathizing with the people who feel lost on Good Friday and on Holy Saturday, and then being able to celebrate on Sunday, because unless we've experienced the emptiness, we won't be able to celebrate the fullness that comes on the following day.
Yeah, exactly, and I think you could probably say that too about that adulterous woman in that gospel who received the forgiveness. And I think that without having received the forgiveness and having maybe made a mistake, then she wouldn't have seen God's mercy in the same way as if we don't experience the cross, then you don't fully appreciate the resurrection.
And there's a great drama in it. I mean, the Greeks, you'll maybe be aware, the Greek, before, in pre-Christian times, had this the thesis about drama being an important social event, because it provoked the emotions, and then there was the catharsis, the purification of the emotions. And I think there's a great drama to Holy Week as well. That we go through it and we sense the Jesus in the Last Supper, and then we sense this is awful about him being flogged and crowned and being betrayed and killed. But we actually are invited to go through the emotions like you would in any drama or novel or film or whatever else. And there's a great drama in Holy Week. And I think we have to go through all the chapters, all the stages in it, before we can actually celebrate them with exultation on Easter Sunday.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think, as we were saying, that the Lord touches our hearts, and if you truly love him, then there's no way not to be somehow emotionally touched by the events of Holy Week, because you can see what was done, and it was done for our sake. It was done because of our sin, and that, to me, of course that's dramatic, and of course that's thought-provoking, and I think that we are invited to reflect on that.
Oran, thank you so much. It's been a very rich reflection by young Oran on the Gospel of Palm Sunday, the crowd welcoming Jesus, and then all that's going to happen over the next number of days before we can reflect on the Easter Sunday Gospel. So Oran, thank you so much for sharing your faith journey with us here today. I hope that helps a number of you to engage with your own faith journey, with young people, with older people, to recognize that a deep faith involves a reasonableness, a head dimension, a heart dimension of prayer and engagement with the Lord and the love of the Lord, and a hands and outreach to those who are most in need of hope in their lives. Oran Gartland, thank you so much for being with me today. Please God, we'll all can enjoy is not the right word, but savour our journey through the wonderful events of Holy Week, and meet again when we reflect with another young person on the Gospel of Easter Sunday. May you have a blessed Holy Week.